Hi, this is my virtual presentation over the European Union, the history of it, as well as the modern problems that it still faces today. My name is Andrew Hensley, and I will be starting with the guidelines. Here is just the information for how my presentation is structured. So in order to grasp a better understanding of what the EU really is, I'm going to be looking at one of the main things that I think comes to people's minds when they hear the word EU, because even though it might not be very well known, I know that a lot of people do know about Brexit. Essentially, what Brexit was the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. A 51.9% vote in favor of leaving the European Union was done. It only had about a 77% voting rate, meaning that only 77% of the people in the UK actually voted on the issue, resulting in 51.9% of them deciding they did want to leave the EU. So here are some questions to ask, knowing that the UK decided to leave Europe. First of is what is the European Union? Why was England a part of it? What benefits possibly did it draw? And if there were benefits of being in part of the Union, then why did such a European dilemma such as Brexit occur? In that a country decided, a very powerful trading country, keep in mind, decided to disassociate itself with many different member states that are built towards European integration. So what is the European Union? Essentially, the definition for this is it is a unique economic and political union between 27 European countries. Of course, it used to be 28. However, with Brexit occurring, it is back down to 27. Some member countries include, starting with Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and Netherlands. They signed a treaty labeled the EEC that was signed in 1958 that initially started this union. And recently today we have additions such as Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovenia, and also there's some more. And it's also important to keep in mind that one of the largest integration efforts are marked to be in 2004. Although that there are one or two member states that have joined following this, it's important to keep in mind that integrationist efforts, which within the European Union have slowed down, and that is due to multiple factors, which we will be evaluating. Also, just to provide some context, some historical roots to understand what the European is, what it was based upon it was to build economic and political closeness among Europe in order to enhance European power throughout the world, essentially to share economic policies and basically have everyone's brain that is throughout Europe to work together to strive for a better standard of living for everyone that's living in Europe. European integration became an essential part of a grand design for making the old world and the likeliness of the new. Essentially what this is saying is the whole entire purpose of having the European Union was to look towards the future, to see how working together can bring about economic growth for all the member countries, as well as political change that could reduce poverty throughout areas, as well as introduce more surrounding countries into the same field of acceptance and to work together to achieve better goals for all of Europe. So here's some background on essentially what the structure of the European Union looks like. And they go into three different types of pillars. The first pillar is the EEC, as I mentioned earlier, which is the European Economic Cooperation. Essentially, this has the following structures. Of course, most of them are centered around economic or political changing or governance. The first one being the Council of Ministers, which is the legislative body of the European Economic Cooperation, which essentially is used to create legislation that all member countries would follow as well, depending on if they were member states or not, or if they just cooperated with the EU, which there are some of those as well. However, we're just focusing on the actual members. It is also comprised of the Commission, which implements the norms and structure of European affairs, the Court of Justice, which creates rules and mandates European law, and lastly, the Common Assembly, which is representatives from member states. So essentially, the Common Assembly allows different countries, such as Italy or Germany, to designate one individual to represent their country and to explain their wants and desires to the European Union, to essentially work together to create policy and make ends meet in a way. However, this is not so easy, as we will soon find out. The second pillar of the EU is the CFSP, which is the Common Foreign and Security Policy. Essentially what this is it's a similar concept to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, as we have studied in this class. And basically it is a body of the European Union that is for their security dilemma and to make sure that outside influences are not harming the domestic plans of the European Union. The last pillar is the JHA, which is the Justice and Home Affairs Council. Essentially, they create policy and law, justice, home affairs. Essentially, they're just used for making sure everyone's following common practices, as well as just legal legislation put out by other pillars of the EU, such as the first pillar being the EEC. All these pillars, of course, work together, and they all are used to support the economic and political integration policies of the European Union. So now we're going to look at the EU today and how it is a multidimensional crisis. As I've been saying, how it is not necessarily as easy for all these member states to necessarily be working together. So essentially, it's a multidimensional crisis, meaning that there's more than one issue that the European Union is facing. The first crisis being the Eurozone crisis. Basically, this has put the legitimacy of the Economic and Monetary Union, the EMU, which is another organization structure part of the European Union, to its test, as it has been fundamentally questioned and challenged. Essentially, this is dealing with the Eurozone, essentially dealing with the monetary and euro, and basically, the European Union was founded on economic policies, and so for it to be questioned and challenged today, and for it to possibly not be in agreement among member states is bad. The second crisis is the migration crisis. So far, over 1 million immigrants from regions such as the Middle East and North Africa have flooded or created a spillover effect of immigrants into Europe. Turkey is one very notable character. The third crisis is that results from all of these, the prior two crises, is political instability and essentially difficulty in member states to cooperate on political policy and economic policy. So essentially this is newer member countries wanting more power, while we still have countries like Italy, Germany, and France wanting to dictate how the European Union's direction is, specifically in Germany and France. So how do these crises impact the international image of the European Union? So essentially the handling of these crises has demonstrated poor EU leadership, often slow and insufficient decision-making, and fraying solidarity among member states. Basically, if the EU is not able to cooperate amongst the member states, then the image that they will be giving to the globe will be that it is an organization that is not functioning efficiently, and that is slow to be making policy and to even agree on policy, let alone making it. I want to bring attention to this comic on the right by Paresh Nath, which is the EU migration crisis. Essentially, this is a comic that's just showing how the amount of immigrants that the EU gets every single year is more than that they can handle, and yet there's just people sitting in front of a wall debating whether or not what to do with this situation. And this is a representation of different member states not coming to agreements and not being able to make policy in order to figure out how to resolve these crises. One of the last things I want to look at is a case study, which is essentially looking at the situation of the Ukraine crisis. So what is the Ukraine crisis? Russian President Vladimir Putin illegally annexed the Crimean Peninsula in 2014, actually. And essentially, the West was struggling to respond to Moscow's moves, with initial sanctions clearly having no real effect. Basically, what this is showing is what the Ukraine crisis is trying to show is Russia's illegal overtake of a neighboring country that European integrationists were wanting to have join the EU. And other neighbors such as that are in threat that are members of the EU today that we have seen as they joined 2004 was Latvia and Lithuania, as they also are very close in bordering Russia. So how does this involve the European Union? So it tested their international security, and it highlights this previously mentioned multidimensional crisis in that the EU has been lacking in being able to control the refugee crisis as well as economic issues. And so this indicates that when it comes to a threat to their own security, especially their own member state security, they do not have the resources or the infrastructure put in place to support security throughout Europe, essentially. So this also helps to indicate the strength of the EU. Politically, it allows us to look at if the EU has the resources, like I said mentioned earlier, to protect fragile/developing countries. And in this case, Ukraine being annexed in 2014, they do not have the resources available to do so, or they lack the efficiency in creating the resources to do so. And economically, this also shows the importance of trade and sanctions. So the EU was founded, and it's important to realize this, was founded essentially as an economic cooperation. And so therefore this indicates that their main focus is going to be growing economically. And so if countries do not meet the expectations of the European Union in accordance with its economy or providing trade, then it might not get as much of a security protection from the EU as compared to other member states as Germany or France. As well as the importance of sanctions, as mentioned earlier, Russia had no problem with being sanctioned by Europe, as well as they were also sanctioned by the US. And this indicates that something earlier that we have talked about in class, which is the concept of hard power or realist theory, and essentially that Russia has taken on realist tools such as using coercion or direct integration techniques such as going into the country and using military means to overtake it, has shown that the European Union lacks this type of power. Instead, they follow possibly more of a liberalist theory type of way. However, the efficiency of it is not up to par. So now I want to tie in everything that we just talked about in the conclusion here, which looks at three main points that I wish that you guys will be able to take away after the end of this presentation. So essentially the EU faces difficulties as an expanding international actor. However, its roots start with it being primarily an economic, building an economic interconnectedness that has grown into a political economic international actor in the world. Basically what this is saying is that the EU is comprised of different pillars and member states that allow it to create economic and political policy throughout the region. The third is today the EU faces crises that test its stability as an international actor as the surrounding world impacts it. This is looking at the multidimensional crisis that we had mentioned with the Eurozone and its economic dependency on the Euro, as well as economic dependency on the member states have with each other, and that can impact it if member states do not agree, as well as the immigration crisis throughout North Africa as well as in the Middle East regions. Lastly, the third is the Ukraine crisis should set an indication or be an indicator for the EU's need to focus on its security issues in order to promote a positive image of itself in the world. If the EU allows something like this to happen again that Russia did and illegally annex it and not provide some type of security policy for new member states, then it's not going to look good for the EU to the rest of the world. Other surrounding countries may not want to join the EU if they see places such as Ukraine fall down to pressure as the EU was unable to keep its promises of integration. So this topic is important because it provides background in modern examples of an international actor, which we have studied often in this class. And it shows how the EU has influence in being a global governance, especially in the region of Europe. and how it impacts things such as security dilemmas, which as well as the differences between real or realist theory as well as liberalist theory. The broader implications of the EU is that it is an economic and political international organization, and that is always in a constant power dynamic between other actors. Just as one country always vies for power of another country, is the same exact situation with the EU. Except this is, of course, a little bit different, as there are multiple member states inside of one being and are acting as one international organization. So this presentation is just aiming to show how international actors have several different factors that affect its success and provide us with an understanding of how globalization as well has allowed organizations such as the EU to practice integration methods. It's important to keep in mind that a lot of the integration methods, especially the ones in 2014 around when the internet was exploding, as well as the world was becoming more interconnected, is when the EU was able to connect with other surrounding member countries. Today, as of course, globalization is still increasing, we have a slowdown of new technology in terms of the internet, so the EU is looking to have to worry about other situations in order to continue practicing their integration movements. So this relates to our class in showing how international actors impact countries throughout the world and how the EU essentially is a buildup of political actors. So that completes my virtual presentation. Thank you so much for watching, and here on the next slide is my bibliography, which provides the sources for the images as well as the information that was shown throughout the presentation. Thank you so much.